Hello.
Okay, now we're good.
We're good? How are
Yep,
you?
doing good. How are you?
I'm good. So are you able to see when people join in?
I can see when people join on YouTube and Instagram.
Okay, well, let me know when you'd like for us to just go ahead and introduce ourselves, or we can do that now.
Someone popped on in Instagram and then popped off. This will also be up on my YouTube channel afterward. If I mean I can take it down, but if it's good content, I'll just leave it up. So
Yeah,
the even if we're covering stuff when people aren't on, it'll still be helpful.
absolutely.
Taking a peek at Facebook. Okay, we've got a few people.
Hello, everyone.
How's everyone doing today? All right.
Thank you for joining. I'm here with Paul Nalabandian. He is our amazing host of this live stream. He does these videos on a, I think, weekly and monthly basis. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, the primary session I do is the third Thursday of every month, unless the month begins on a Wednesday or Thursday, then it's fourth Thursday, which it will be this month. We're going to do it this Thursday. So each month I do an hour-long session covering important metrics in the economy, mortgage rates, and what's happening in the real estate market. That's the primary session I do each month for my team, Fulcrum Residential, our brokerage, Keller Williams Capital Properties, and then any other agents or industry professionals, and also consumers if they want to pop on. It's geared towards agents and industry professionals, but anyone is welcome to join and get some insight.
Yeah, I asked to join in with Paul. I work kind of doing little in-house marketing for Universal Title. I'm a client experience manager there, and Paul is one of our amazing clients. And I quite often am working with real estate agents that have this question of what is the best way for me to pull market stats. And Paul has an amazing reputation for having amazing knowledge surrounding market stats. So we've been talking for a while now of like how do we best share this knowledge with these people who are looking for it. And he was nice enough to invite me here. So thank you, Paul, for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for helping organize and set this up. And I just want to go a little background about me and how this kind of evolved. I've been in real estate for about 8 years now with the team Fulcrum Residential, one of the top teams in the country. We are incredible. I've also affiliated with Keller Williams Capital Properties at the same time. And I've been on the Agent Leadership Council for it's my sixth consecutive year with the KWCP ALC. But the reason I started this is that I realized that I would be studying this stuff myself and staying up to speed on what was happening in the market. But when I would talk to a lot of top agents, they would say things about the market and what was going on that just wasn't true. And I thought, well, if top agents don't necessarily understand what's happening in the market, then new agents are probably even more lost. And there just seemed to be a void of this information out there. So I started doing it just internally with Fulcrum and then broadened it to the brokerage. And now it's open to everyone. And then Kimia came up with the idea for this session, and it's like, okay, it's nice to, what's the old saying, that it's better to teach someone to fish than to give them some fish or whatever it is. And so it's nice to do these sessions each month, but it might be even more helpful to do a live Q&A session where we just field questions of people who are preparing for listing appointments, or they want to better understand the environment their buyers are going into in Virginia or DC or Maryland. And so that's what this is. Anyone who is on, feel free to ask specific questions about, oh, I don't know what's happening in Arlington right now, or what's important to look at and how do I find it? Or, like I said, I'm preparing for this listing appointment and I don't really know what's going on in that neighborhood related to these homes. Any questions like that, feel free to fire away, and we will get through all of them if we can.
Yes, I'm here, to interview Paul. I've gathered some good questions, I think, about all of this data, so that this could go a little bit smoother, with a lot of the questions that I'm hearing in terms of getting what I think people want to hear. But should you guys have some questions, please. I'm also here to moderate, so I'm happy to bring them up to Paul as we go along. So don't be afraid to send those in. Should we get started?
Yeah.
Okay, so Paul, um, my first question for you is what would you say is the most important market indicator that every agent should be watching right now?
I wouldn't say there's just one market indicator, but if you're not going to be paying attention to everything, I would say if you know the days on market, the level of inventory, and where prices are, that should give you a pretty good rough snapshot of what's happening in any specific area. And it would be good to understand new pending levels, where those are at compared to the same time last year, closed transactions, where those are at compared to the same time last year, new listings, active listings, all of that stuff is super important. But if you know nothing else other than median days on market and level of inventory and prices, then you'll have a rough idea, even without all those other specific metrics, of where supply and demand is. And that's key for positioning your listings. So if you know that, you'll know roughly whether it's a seller's market or a buyer's market, and you'll have a good idea of how you should be pricing generally. And then you need to look at specific data for that for your home type. And then also the same with buyers. If you know you're in an area where the median days on market is a week, and prices are shooting up, well, then it's probably a fairly competitive environment. If properties are hitting the market on a Thursday, you might want to see them on a Thursday or Friday and be ready to rock and roll, maybe with a pre-inspection that same day, get an offer in if there's not a deadline.
That is definitely some good information. And I guess my next question would be how often should agents be pulling these stats? Daily, weekly, monthly? What do you recommend?
I would recommend to at least be aware, at least check in once a month as Bright releases their monthly data from the prior month, get an idea of where things generally stand. It's also helpful, Bright releases data on a weekly basis. That's helpful to take a look at, with the understanding that what's going on in a given week, it can be a little bit too small of a sample size. So you might see that this week, new pending shot up year over year, or went down year over year. Well, if that's all you know, it might seem to tell a story that it's not. And just for example, I know we're heading into the warm months, thankfully, but in the winter, if we get a bad winter storm, that can really negatively affect pendings and showing level for that week, because people just won't be getting out. And sometimes even doesn't even have to be a storm. The storm doesn't even actually have to happen, but if a big storm is forecast, then people with prime listings might say, well, if this storm hits, nobody's going to see the property. We're going to be sitting until the next week. So let's hold our listings for a week. So if you're just looking at the weekly data in that scenario, the week of the storm, you'd see new listings go down, you'd see new pendings go down, you'd see showing activity go down. And then the following week, you would see new listings go up, showings go up, new pendings go up. Whereas taking those both of those weeks together, it kind of evens out. So don't want to belabor this point, but it's at least look on a monthly basis, keep an eye on the weekly stuff, but if you look at it regularly, then you'll know what's going on and you'll understand the context. But that is key, the context. So whenever you're looking at weekly data, just it's relevant, but it's more helpful to understand what's going on in the market in a broader time frame. And then lastly, anytime you are preparing for a listing appointment, you should specifically go in to make sure you are up to speed with market data relevant to that listing. So what's been happening in the neighborhood? What has gone under contract recently? What has sold recently for similar properties? And you need to do that to make sure you have an accurate idea of the market value of that home. And then same thing with buyers. If you have a buyer looking at a certain price point, if you're not already, if you don't just have the institutional knowledge of what's happening in that market, you should take a close look to get an idea of pricing and how quickly you guys need to move and what the competitive environment might be.
I really love that point because I think when you're trying to move that listing, for instance, and you're like, "What's going on? Why is it not moving?" or whatever, and you are kind of moving out of anxiety because you want to get that sold, it's important to think about, okay, well, yeah, there's a snowstorm going on, and
Hmm.
or even if you have that buyer and you're looking at last week's data, keep that in mind. If you feel like you are trying to take advantage of some competition, well, maybe there was just a heat wave that weekend and people weren't making it to the open houses. So I think that it's good because by when you're zooming in, you have to zoom out and think about the context. So next question, and I think it's almost like why we're meeting here today,
Hmm.
is what's the biggest mistake you see agents make when interpreting market data?
The I'll uh, again, I'll kind of I'll adapt the question just a little. I'll say there are two primary mistakes that I see agents make, and they're essentially opposite sides of the same coin. The first is that if agents aren't following the market, what's happening here very closely, they'll see national articles and Inman or Wall Street Journal or wherever talking about what's going on in real estate, and they'll assume that applies here. And it's not necessarily the case. The DMV market is fairly unique in that we have constrained supply. In core DMV, there's not a lot of vacant land. You're not having it's uncommon for there to be developments where hundreds of houses are just going up right in core DMV. So we have constrained supply, and then we have high demand. We also have a lot of employment tends to be fairly robust here. We have a lot of recession-proof jobs. So things can be happening in markets around the country and that doesn't reflect what is going on here. So that's problem number one. People like, oh, real estate market is doing this, that, and think it's relevant here when it's usually not. Then the other, and I see this probably more often, but the other is that agents will know what's going on with their clients in their neighborhood focus area and think that that is what is happening on a broader scale. And that's usually not the case. Take right now DC, for instance. If you're looking for detached single family home in a lot of neighborhoods in DC, there's going to be a fair amount of competition and you might have to move quickly. Supply is somewhat constrained. If you're looking for a condo in a lot of DC, you'll have 6 months of inventory. You'll have properties sitting on the market. I mean, median days on market for condos, it depends on exactly the neighborhood and the type of condo, but they're running anywhere from like 4 to 10 weeks before these condos go under contract. And so if you have a client in DC just looking at condos, you could be thinking, "Oh, this is a super soft market, it's a buyer's market." And then if you pick up a client who's looking for a detached home, you could be completely unprepared for what is happening. So that's yeah, that's big mistake number 2. And I that's really when I would hear, I was saying top agents talk about the market and what's going on. It's not that they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, these are successful, smart people, but it's they're just taking their what's going on in their specific world and assuming that's what's going on in general, and that's almost never the case. I mean, we see some similarities throughout different areas, but there's a lot of difference when we get from one neighborhood to another, one county to another, and then also property type and price point. Price point makes a huge difference in level of supply and demand.
That leads a bit into kind of my next question. What are your thoughts on the national headlines versus local data, and how can agents approach macro versus micro trends? I feel like you kind of went in a little bit on the
Mhm.
micro trends in your answer for the last question, but you can maybe like put it a little bit more into context or talk about the macro trends for sure.
Yeah, and there is national data that's important, but I would say the shortest answer to that question is when it comes to information about the economy, national is great because that's what's important. And it's important because the national economy is what drives mortgage rates. So mortgage rates are national. If you're trying to get a better understanding of what's happening in the mortgage market, national data is what I focus on, and that's important. When it comes to real estate data, I mean, yeah, if you just like staying informed on what's going on and overall housing trends and new housing starts and national sales levels, I mean, more power to you, go ahead, but just don't assume any of that applies to us. It may, but really when it comes to preparing yourselves to better counsel your clients, national data is irrelevant, and you really need to look at what is happening in a given area. And it depends. If like at minimum, you should have an idea of what's going on in the county that your clients are operating in, or sometimes, it'll be like people will be looking in upper Northwest DC into Chevy Chase into southern Maryland, right there in Montgomery County. And so obviously that crosses goes from the district into another county. But at minimum, you should have an understanding of what's going on in that pocket. And then even for listing appointments, you should be then honing in, and it depends on the area. Sometimes it's if you go one block in one direction, then the nature of the neighborhood changes and it's no longer relevant for comparable purposes and market assessment. So it could just be you're looking in a 2 block area and your information has to be that level of detail in order to adequately prepare. Or if you're let's say you have a listing coming up in a large condo building that has enough market activity to give you relevant data. Well, if for a condo, if you have enough transactions that have been going on in the building, then you don't really need to look outside of that building because that's going to be the most relevant data. It's still important to know what's happening in the market as a whole and the level of buyers for that type of property and so on. But for pricing purposes, you may not look any farther than that building.
Yeah, I'm telling people more and more that nowadays it feels like, you can't just like almost look at a zip code. You got to look at neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood, because they're like, how's the market? I'm like, it's pretty, it varies. Like what define market? What are you looking at? Single families, townhomes, condos, where,
Mhm.
and when we say where nowadays, we're really talking about where, you know, not just a zip code a lot of times.
Mhm. Yeah, very true. Like in Northern Virginia, usually it's like north of 50, south of 50. There's a bit
Yeah.
of a divide in prices and perception. And, in DC, North Capitol Street, east of North Capitol, west of North Capitol. And I'm not saying about anything about these neighborhoods on either side. I'm just saying there is a distinction usually. in what's happening in the market and in prices simply by crossing a road. So yeah, excellent point.
100%. Yes. Okay, so now that we're getting a little bit more context about, why people are not getting correct market data, um, how often they should pull it, what are you doing on your end? Because that is the number one question I get from agents is where do I go? Where's the best thing for me to do to actually pull market data?
hmm Yeah, Bright MLS is the source because that's where all of the data comes from for our region. And they release monthly data. It usually comes out on the 11th. So on the 11th of this month, they released their data for April. And so that's what I'll do, and I can show you specifically how to find that if people aren't familiar. But at least once a month, pop into Bright MLS, take a look at that. And then also with what I was talking about preparing for listing presentations or wanting to know what's happening in a specific area, I'll do the same thing, go into Bright MLS. I'll just do a little radius of where I want to focus, pull up that, break it down by what's relevant to me, take a peek. I'll run through how to do that. And then I also personally, so I love smart charts. Smart charts pulls data from the MLS, but it breaks it down in a way that's not offered in the MLS. And that's super helpful. So I can run through each of those right now if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you make sure is it's to mention like the URL for smart charts? I know we all know Bright MLS, but is it smartcharts.com or what is exactly the website name?
Yeah, I should be able to think when I'm
When you show your
sharing.
screen, great. Yes,
Yeah.
because I
Can you see
know
that
that
now?
you really I do. I know you really like this platform, and I think it'd be really important for our users to know how to access it. Um, but yeah, should we go ahead and look up a neighborhood?
Yeah. Well, first I will hold on. Speaking of my listing
Just
manager, is
roll
just calling.
through.
1 second.
Sure.
Okay. I will actually let me pop over to the MLS first. And so
That
this
sounds good.
is when basically when you log into the MLS, this is the dashboard, what you see. If you want to find the monthly report I was talking about, you just select news, and it's not always going to be prominent right at the top. Oftentimes it is, but it depends on when you're taking a look, if it just got released or what else they're promoting. But the monthly market report will be generally somewhere in here in news, and then you just click on it, you go down to get the latest reports. This dashboard, this will give you kind of some, some rough information, but we want to go to Washington DC Metro, and then that'll be the monthly report. And as you can see, it runs through your overall data, and then it'll give you some data with kind of benchmark levels from prior years, which is really helpful. And then it'll break down into county data. And I know we're not like, I'll get into all of this stuff in more detail on Thursday when I run through what's actually going on. But I just want to mention a couple of things really quickly. And this is how understanding what's happening is so key. I hear, like, Camille, it's crazy. I hear so many people, so many agents talking about how just inventory is flooding the market and we have such massive inventory. And I hear clients and potential clients say the same thing. Oh, I hear it's just there's a ton of new listings and the market's changing and all of this stuff. And there are changes, but like here, when you take a look, this is new listings. Um, you can see that new listings have been steadily increasing, but they're now just at the low range of where we have been for the past 5 years. So it's like an increase of nothing is still nothing. When you look at historically where we're at, inventory level is still extremely, extremely low. But if all you're like, if you're kind of following stuff and you're just hearing, oh, inventory is going up, I'll tell all my clients it's now a buyer's market, and my sellers are going to run into trouble and buyers are going to be able to dictate terms. That's not the case at all. But it's like sometimes a little bit of knowledge is the most dangerous thing. So now I'm going. So this is the just to put a cap on that, that's the monthly data. There's also weekly data that comes out that's released every week. It'll go through the prior Sunday, and that comes out early in the week. And that will just break down. It'll tell you what's going on, what the numbers are relative to the same week last year, and then the week prior. And they also break it down into county level on a separate
So
report.
a lot of why we also decided to do this is because um, of the marketing context that I bring into this conversation too.
Hmm.
And a lot of the times I have agents that come to me and they're like, Kimia, I need to own this, neighborhood. This needs to be my neighborhood. I need to be doing like weekly social media updates or, a newsletter that goes out every month about this neighborhood to my CRM. Which would you recommend between the two? Um, Right, MLS, or would you recommend smart charts for someone who wants to be like the neighborhood expert?
Hmm. I would say both, because each they offer different things. And I'll give you a specific example. Do you have a neighborhood in particular, or if we have someone who wants to drop a comment in, if there's anything like your practice area that you focus on, or a presentation or an appointment that you're having to prepare for. So if anybody has a specific area they'd like us to focus on, drop it in the comment. Otherwise, Camilla, if you want something to use an example, or I can just come up with it. But yeah, and then I'll run through that.
I'm actually just curious, so let's look up my neighborhood. I live in Columbia Heights, DC.
Hmm. Okay. So that is 20009. I assume that
I'm
covers
in
the.
20010, but I do think it also is
Okay.
2009.
All right. So they're in smart charts. And so going back to the monthly data, they'll break it down by county, but it's not going to be any deeper than just DC. So with the monthly report, you can break it down by county, you can't break it down by neighborhood. You can do that elsewhere in the MLS, and I'll get to that in just a second. But back to smart charts for a minute. So if you want to look in your zip code, you can just pull it up at the top in location. You saw when I.
If you're pulling it right now, it's not presenting on
Oh,
for us. Maybe it's in a different tab.
nope, it's because I stopped sharing screen
Oh,
when I
got
was
you.
popping back
Okay.
on.
And
All
I
right.
just want to tell everyone, like, please excuse my voice. I'm feeling a little under the weather today, so if I sound kind of froggy, please excuse me. Oh, yeah, there we go. So I guess it's also technically Mount Pleasant.
So we'll go back to. Let's just go. Okay, so you can pop into any neighborhood. Usually, when you go in, it'll just have kind of Mid Atlantic, or it might be DC Metro when you go in. And so just at the top, punch in the zip code you're interested in, and you could also just put in the neighborhood. So and so here you can just plug that in, because I'm not sure exactly where their subdivision of Columbia Heights matches up. Zip Zips easier to designate, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. But if you wanted to see, so you can pop in here, plug that in, it'll pull up Then you'll see just kind of the quick dashboard. It will tell you closed sales, new pendings, active listings, months of supply. You can see where that is relative to historical trends. And you can see Columbia Heights is one of the areas where we're seeing more supply relative to past years. And so you can see right now for April, there were 6.3 months of inventory. The 5-year average is 3.4. 6 months of inventory is equilibrium generally considered. Some people will say 4 to 6, some people will say 5 to 6 when it starts equilibrium. So this is either right now for Columbia Heights overall, it's either an even market or a buyer's market, depending on specifically what you're looking at. And then we can dig a little deeper to find that out. So if you were, let's say you had clients on either side, either buyers or sellers who had a condo or were looking to buy a condo or had fee simple or were looking to buy fee simple, then you can just pop in to the breakdown. So here we'll go into days on market. I'm just going to go the past 6 months, look at actual values, and here we can break down by property type. So I'm going to select condos and co-ops, and then also detached homes and row homes. And what you can see here, okay, so that's median days on market. So clearly there is some.
Houses sitting on there, yeah,
So
for a long
this
time.
is just. So I just know from what's happening that this is either an error in their data, which happens sometimes. I'll find that from time to time where it's just things don't match up and there was a problem in pulling the data. So this is either just a straight mistake, which is what it seems to be, because they're saying the median days on market for detached homes are 177, and they're also saying that's exactly what it was in April 24. It might also be there are just so few detached homes in that area. It
Right.
but so that's something we can pop over and look at. So closed sales. Yeah, there you go. So few detached homes in that zip that so we had one closed sale. Okay, so that's also where it's important to know if you were just like, oh, I'm going to get an idea and share what's happening in Columbia Heights and tell people that detached homes are taking forever to sell. It's like, well, no, it's such a minor part of the market that this data is not relevant. So going back to days on market, I'm just going to take detached out for a minute. You can see that median days on market for condos, 22 days, townhomes are 8 days. So if you have a condo buyer looking in Columbia Heights, and I can tell you specifically, I have a condo listing in Columbia Heights right now. Certain segments of the condo market, the median days on market are much higher than 22. What's happening right now in the condo market is the higher end luxury condos, just the wow turnkey, those condos tend to go under contract fairly quickly. And those condos at lower price points that are not as turnkey tend to sit for quite a while. So the overall number doesn't even give you the picture. But it's clear from here at least that and this is going to be the case in a lot of our markets, but it's fee simple, going under contract really quickly. Condos, you have a little bit more time. And then if you were curious how this compares to last year, then you just click on the changes and you can see that that townhomes in Columbia Heights are actually selling a little more quickly than they were in April. Condos are pretty close to even. Do you want me to hit one more piece of information from Smart Charts before I move on? Anything else like, you think it would be helpful for people to see?
I actually think that, I mean, whether you wanna do it on, I guess probably it'd be best for MLS, but we decided to talk about days on market and what's your take on that. But we can
Mhm.
also talk, for instance, if you think it's appropriate, we can talk about how agents can tailor this data based off their type of client, whether they're a buyer, a seller, for example, like in listing presentations, newsletters, or social media updates, like these graphs are amazing. Are you
Mhm.
able to save these graphs, or how does that work with reporting and all?
Yeah, you can download them, which would be like you can download them into an Excel sheet, a PDF. So depending on how you wanted to create your newsletter, that would choose one of those. You could view it as an image file, and so that you could just plug this straight into your newsletter. And they're also very, you can, depending on how you want to present it visually, you can have just straight numbers
That's
or
crazy valuable because a lot of the issue is translating this data to your client base, and they're not going to understand just numbers. Like a lot of people are visual, especially if they're not within this industry. They need these visuals to be able to really understand what you're trying to say to them or what the market is trying to say.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And while we're here, I just want to point out another thing. Like I hear so much that is just not accurate. And one of the things I'll hear is that people are saying, "Oh, prices are soft in DC." And they have been at some points, and they are still in certain areas. But here, just when we're on Columbia Heights, if you look at the median sale price for all property types, it's higher than it was last year. And so we're seeing upward pricing pressure still in DC. Um, and so that's just important to know. And just, side note, if anyone who thinks we're talking about it just makes me laugh when people be talking about, oh, this is a soft market, it's a buyer's market. We've just hit So the April is the most recent data that was reported, and median sales price increased again in April, and that is either 23 or 24. I forget exactly, but basically we've had 2 years where every single month median sales price has increased for that month year over year. So it's hard to be
Crazy.
in a buyer's market when prices are increasing every single month. The one last thing I want to point out here on Smart Charts is you can also do a report, which is really helpful. And if you want someone just to have a good snapshot of what's happening with all the different metrics, and I'll just create a couple of them here. So say if you wanted to know, okay, well, what was going on in April right in this area, or year to date, I'd like to have a better idea of where this neighborhood is so far in 2025. And so this is the monthly, and it breaks down. It shows total volume, average sold price, median sold price, transactions closed, days on market, all of that stuff. Active listings, new under contract. Super helpful. It gives the most recent month, and then it also compares it to the prior year, same month, and lets you know the percentage change. And then this is also additionally, it's helpful where it breaks down by property type. And so different size attached homes, and then also condos. And this is going back to where we saw the funky data on the detached homes. And you see here also it's so one detached 4-bedroom home sold. That's the only detached home that's sold in the zip for that month. And then this is just year to date. So January through April, same information, but year to date, and you can see same kind of thing. So there were year to date, 3 detached homes have sold in Columbia Heights. So if you're looking at any kind of aggregate data on detached homes in the zip code, it's pretty much irrelevant because the numbers are just too small to have meaning. And yeah, so that's a quick summary. There are also, you can break down usually when you type in a zip code, then below that, it will have even smaller little pockets and neighborhoods. Sometimes this information is relevant. You can focus in on exactly where you're interested in, if it's a listing or a potential listing, but just make sure you look at how many transactions that data encompasses. Because again, if it's like the number is really low, then the trends aren't going to be relative because the data set is too small.
Okay. Well, I think our next question, we can get to it now, which was, what is your take on analyzing days on market in the MLS, especially looking at closed data versus active listings?
hmm Before we do that, just because I have it up, I just want to pop into something else in the MLS that is super
Let's
helpful
do it.
and a thing that a lot of people don't know. So I'll just stick with same zip code and we'll break down. First, let's just do condos. So all I did was go into the MLS search, typed in the zip code, went down to ownership interest, hit condo. Now, if I was doing this, I would probably put in a price because price is always going to be relative. And so I'll just say, let's say we have somebody looking at a, nice higher end condo, or we'll just say kind of mid range. Let's do like 8 on the price. And then when we go to results, and this is I can't even remember now how long it took me to find this, but I've been in real estate for at least a year or two before I realized you could pull stats from any little subset. So this is we went in, we hit your zip code, condos within a certain price, pulled the results, and then if you select stats and tabular, it will give you a breakdown of some key metrics for those homes. And so right now, for condos between 400 and 800,000 in that zip code, you can see, sorry, I want to add to that. So let's say if we wanted to see what's happening now, what's under contract, and what's sold in the past 2 months. So by
And this
doing
is
that,
like free with your Bright MLS subscription ship that pretty much everyone should have. Otherwise, it'd be very, very hard to be employed as a real estate agent right now. But Smart Charts is subscription based. Is that
Mhm.
correct, Paul?
That is true. Yes, Smart Charts requires an additional subscription, and most real estate agents, if virtually all, will have Bright MLS subscriptions, and this comes as part of that. Now, just running that search, taking that subset, and then hitting the little stats tab, we can just see a really quick snapshot of what's happening in the market. So you have 4 coming soon properties, you have 31 that are active on the market, 2 under contract, 1 pending, 11 closed, and 49 total. And if you look at what's closed, you can see, okay, uh, average days on market is over 2 months, and properties are selling at around 96% of list price. And so that tells you, okay, in this specific price point in that neighborhood, it's it's things are a little slow. So important to know if you have a listing, might take a little while to sell. If you're representing buyers, then you have some leverage there. And then a really quick way to just look at days on market. They're kind of just two simple ways to estimate it. You can say that what's under contract and pending right now is 3. It's like so that's 3 transactions went under contract within 30 days because average time from contract to close. So that's one way you could do it. You could say, okay, there are 31 active listings, 3 went under contract in a month. That would put you at about 10 months of inventory. Because we have a little bit bigger data set for closed, because I did 2 months, you can see 11 closed transactions over 2 months, which puts us at about 5.5 per month, which would give us a little less than 6 months of inventory. And so that's just a way, just from this data, then you can have an idea, just looking at active, under contract, and closed, you can see how quickly properties are going under contract and where that inventory level is. So this is, you could say, all right, I know we looked at a little bit broader picture, but now here specifically, it's like, all right, this is either an even market or a bit of a buyer's market for condos. And then same thing, if you were more interested in Be Simple, just and this is the same way you would run a search. The only difference is when you get the results, you just click on stats. So we can see here that Be Simple level is much lower, fewer active properties, fewer closed properties, and see the properties that did close went pretty quickly. Okay, and now your sorry, your the question you asked right before I went into all of that.
Oh, whoops, sorry, I was on mute. I said one more time. Let's see if you'll answer this time. Okay. What is your take on analyzing days on market in the MLS, specifically looking at closed data versus active listings?
Mhm. So, yeah, in as far as, like, analyzing days on market for
Yeah, so for like if you were looking for like a buyer, for instance,
mhm,
if you yeah, I think, like, there's always that feeling that if you see that listing is on, the market for a really, really long time, is it still a good idea to negotiate there? What are your thoughts in that regard?
yeah, and that's where kind of the data that you can pull, the overall market data, and then the specific data converge. And this is true of any situation, even if a property just came on the market or if it's been on the market for 3 months. And this is like going beyond just market data, but one of the things that shocks me when I have a listing, if I receive an offer from an agent that I've never spoken with, like I don't even know who this person is, and they drop an offer in my lap. So if we haven't spoken, what if there's something unusual my client is looking for? How can they understand the competitive situation relevant to this specific property if they haven't even tried to get at that? So I would say, like not necessarily the scope of this session, but when you're representing a buyer, if you're interested in a property, your once your buyer has serious interest and is considering submitting an offer, then your next step should be reaching out to the listing agent and asking a lot of questions. And so for me personally, I don't like to reach out to listing agents until my buyer has a serious level of interest because like when I get calls, I'll have calls from buyer agents who are just asking question after question after question after question. They haven't even seen the property yet. They're talking about, oh, we're going to submit an offer, and and then they do a showing, and I never hear from them again, and they've just wasted my time. And it's just relationships are important, and if you as a buyer agent make a good impression with the listing agent, that can go a long way in that transaction or transactions in the future. And if you make a bad impression, and if you're wasting someone's time, that's a very easy way to make a bad impression. Then that's not going to necessarily benefit you. So I would say in your situation, again, like you strain a little bit from the core topics of this session, but whether the property just went on the just went on the market or it had been sitting for a couple of months, like first thing should be reach out to the listing agent and ask what their interest level is like, because I've had crazy situations where I've had buyers interested in a property that's been on the market for a little while. I reach out to the listing agent, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we have an offer coming in tomorrow." So if I didn't get that information, I could have looked and seen how long it had been on the market and make my assessment and submitted an offer with contingencies and probably a lower price, and then not be successful. So first reach out to the listing agent, ask what interest is like, if anything is coming in, regardless of how long it's been on the market, and then say, my question is always, other than price, what is important to your seller? Sometimes it's like you'll have agents do a 2-week or a 3-week close thinking, oh, the sellers are going to love that, when they don't understand that the seller actually needs to stay in the property a little bit longer. And so that can either be a rent back or a longer closing period, but that's something that could be negotiated. So that's kind of the most important thing: get actionable intel related to that specific property. But then overall, it's like if you know that a type of property within a price point is going under contract in a week or two, and this property your buyers are interested in has been on the market for 2 months, then it's overpriced. Like it's just it's that simple. And you could say, oh well, it might be that the property has some defects. Well, yeah, it probably does, and you should incorporate that into your price. So everything comes down to price. So it's just, I mean, some quick shortcuts are, if the market in general and that property is stuff's going quickly, this one isn't, then your starting point is, oh, it's probably overpriced. And if you look under the hood and analyze more specific data, that will probably reflect that.
All right. Well, it looks like we're getting into like our last, 10 minutes with each other. If anyone has any questions still, please, please, please let us know. Honestly, Paul, you're doing such an amazing job. I think there is a lot of amazing knowledge coming everyone's way. And I'd love to ask you a little bit more about how, often are you talking about all this? I know you mentioned your program, with your live streams and how consistent you are with that. Do you do any teaching of other agents outside of this with market data? And also, really important is, why does this all matter? Like, what value do you find this has brought to your clients and to your business?
Hmm. Yeah, great questions. So I'll try to hit them in order. So the primary thing I do related to communicating what's going on in the market is my monthly session. The next one is coming up this Thursday at 8:30. It'll be on my YouTube channel. We'll also be live streaming just like this across Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Then after the session is live, the recording goes on my YouTube channel, so you can check that out. People can also, if they reach out to me, they can get on my list to give them the actual deck of information that I go through, which is super helpful. So I do that on a monthly basis. And then I'll also sometimes I present that in person at a brokerage office. So I'll just do a live session in front of people running through that. And then I'll also sometimes at like monthly team meetings or various one-offs, I'll present market data
I'm
for
sure
classes.
your coworkers love you. They love you over at Fulcrum. I know, like they're always talking about how amazing you are and the level of value and knowledge. I know you guys do all help each other with your skill set over at Fulcrum, right?
Yeah, yeah, they do. I'll get there. I'll have my colleagues, my fellow Fulcrum agents, will reach out to me a fair amount, asking questions about what's happening in this market, or I'm preparing for a listing presentation. What's going on here? Or this is what I think. Is this accurate? And I'm more than happy to help. Like I said, this is why I started this. Is I felt there was a void in anyone providing this type of information, and I wanted to make sure that our team, because it's incredible agents, and I wanted to make sure that we're continuing to perform at elite level and helping our clients. But then beyond that, and this is like, the power of a team, I can pull all the data in the world, but that micro level, like what is happening for someone who submitted an offer on a property in Columbia Heights, or a property in central DC, or in Arlington or Alexandria. So I'm also relying on them a lot. Every month after our session, we have kind of a breakdown, and I'll be asking people, I'll say, what are you seeing? Who submitted offers this week? Was it a competitive situation? Were there multiple offers? Did it ratify above list price? What contingencies did you have? And so it's just incredible having those. I mean, so many resources within Fulcrum, but that is just one of them. And for those of you who aren't on a team, it's your brokerage. If Keller Williams Capital Properties, I know within our brokerage, we foster a strong sense of community and giving back and helping agents along. And there were so many agents that helped me when I was getting started that I mean, anyone calls me asking questions. I don't care if I have no idea who they are. I will take that phone call and try to help them. And then as far as classes, I I'll do the sessions related to market data, but then also just teach classes on pretty much any kind of topic. And a lot of it relates into it. Like I'll teach classes specifically on pricing a listing. And obviously, you have to understand the market data in order to price a listing.
So really quickly, what would you say to an agent that just says, "Paul, like I'm not a numbers person. I can't do numbers when we're talking about market data." What would you say to them?
I'd say, who cares? Like, do you want to be an out of work,
Right.
not numbers person? And so I'm not a numbers person. I don't like numbers. I took an accounting class in high school and I was like, this is a mistake. I don't ever want to get near numbers again. I like math was always my best subject, but I didn't like it and like you never took another math class after high school. So I don't enjoy digging into all of this data, but it's essential. It's
Right.
like if you don't know, if you don't understand the data in our industry, it's like you're walking through a house with all the curtains closed and the lights are off. And you're sitting there and you're holding your client's hand and you're walking along and all of a sudden you run into the coffee table and you didn't know it was there until you hit it and it caused some pain. And like that's what the process will be like if you don't understand what's happening in the market. How are you supposed to prepare your clients? How are you supposed to prepare competitive offers? Or if you're listing a property, how do you know how to price it appropriately? Or what environment you're entering into. So when you dig into the data, instead of it being that dark house with the drapes closed, no lights on, all the lights are on and the windows are open and you can see exactly what's happening and you're walking through and you know, oh, there's the coffee table. Let me walk around it. Here's the door. Let me open the door. And it's a seamless, smooth process because you everything is illuminated and you understand your environment. So if you don't like digging into this, then I mean, there's an easy answer. Like I said, this is why I started providing this information. So you can just join my session each month. I love sharing this information with my fellow agents because it's like I feel like we have a responsibility to make sure that there's a minimum level of service we are providing to our clients. And it's important that every agent is able to provide good service and an expert advice and guidance to our clients. So I'm more than happy to share this information. And I would tell people if you don't want to do it, just join my session each month, get on my list for the deck, and I'll tell you an hour a month, and I'll keep you updated.
100% with everything that you said. I mean, we have to ask ourselves because we all want to believe that we're providing, value to our clients and stuff, but you got to think like if I'm not willing to put in this work just to know, what the values of homes are and what to expect of the market, am I really even giving the baseline of service, and expertise.
Mhm.
And the answer's gotta be yes, I will do it. Um,
Yeah, and
so
I, I
thank
want to
you.
I want to add to that. It right now, people always say, "Oh, now it's more important than ever." And I won't say right now it's more important than ever, but it's more important than it has been in a while. And that's for two primary reasons. One is that a lot of our clients are freaking out. I have a lot of people in clients, potential clients, my friend, my sphere who are federal government employees, and there's so much uncertainty. But then even beyond that, with what's happening with the economy and tariffs, there's so much like if someone asked me like what do you see as one through line or one thread or one constant that we can expect over the next few months, I would say the only thing you can expect for sure is volatility, like extreme volatility, because stuff is just like we're going to do this, no we're not going to do that, it's reversing course, or even things that the administration is trying to do, and when they're not reversing course, the courts are stopping them. And so because of that, there's so much uncertainty that and there's so much misinformation, it is more important than it has been in a long time to be able to counsel our clients with what is actually happening. And then the other is just because of this level of volatility, information is dated more quickly than it has been in the past. And so if you're like, oh, I follow stuff, I kind of have an idea of what's going on, you may really have no idea of where things are changing. And so right now, it's like we need to counsel and calm our clients, but then we also need to make sure that we understand what is happening because a lot is going on almost a daily basis that can have outsized impacts on our industry.
Well, dang on it, Paul. I had so many questions left for you, and you answered all of them on your own. You are really too good. I am seriously impressed by you. That is why I wanted to meet with you today. And I'm so glad that I did. I really hope this brings a lot of answered questions to our real estate agent friends. And I think that this week, the one thing that anyone can do to just get ahead of how they can do themselves a service with understanding market stats and do their clients a service is they could just join in on your next session, right? And when
8:30 to
exactly that
9:30.
is?
8:30 to
Yeah.
9:30 on Thursday, and I run through primary economic metrics, the mortgage market, where all that's at, then jump into real estate data, go DMV wide, break it down by county, look at specific trends, where things are headed, what's important to know for your clients. So, yep,
All right. Well,
good.
it's Paul Knows Real Estate on YouTube, correct?
Yep.
That's where you can find him. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Again, I'm Kimia Raissian with Universal Title. I help with marketing as the client experience manager over in DC, Bethesda, and Fairfax. And Paul, do you want to sign us off?
Yeah, just thanks everybody for joining. Looking forward to seeing you on Thursday at our market session and appreciate this, Camilla. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. We got to come up with a cool outro slogan next time.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Keep watching for it, guys. Bye.